also concentration of a lot of Arendtiana in Italy, scholar of Arendt in Italy, that who also wrote and throughout the journal Philosophia Politica wrote on Hannah Arendt at the beginning in the 80s and after over time. And yeah, I will conclude here.
Thank you very much, Barbara, for a case study which shows uses and appropriation in the reception process. So, yes, please, Stefan.
Well, I have lots of questions, but I think that I will talk of many things also before. But just first question, when you talk about the translation of Hannah Arendt herself of the books, I didn't understand what was the...
She controlled the translation of some books.
Yes, but what then is the question is you will look on what different version is then translated into Italian, because
in German.
From
English to German.
From English or the German version, because sometimes they are very different, and the differences are also the position, self-positioning of Arendt in the different countries. And if you look also in Italy, if you can say that in Italy there's a translation, the channel of translation is more like the German one or the English one. You have seen it. The first question. The second question is about the items. You listed the item and concepts, and the question is in which period are these items, in which publication? Because many items are very new, like performatives and so on, and the portraits, for example, are very old, and they are also linked to other items. So, well, I have many other questions, but you can.
Yeah, we can. I just forgot the first question. That what was for me interesting was to see that the difference between Italy and Germany within the comparative literature, we can say, and here to analyze which is the channel of the translation, for example, in Italy. What I know is that I think that between past and present, I think that was translated from Germany, but I'm not so sure. There are also different editions, because the first edition from between past and future was translated in 1970, for example, but it was for this edition is forgotten. And the second question, yeah, I simplify, obviously, because I have a lot of things to show. What is interesting, for example, is I try to go. For Germany, for example, institutional concepts, what I was institutional concept, started in after 1906, and we have an increase, a really increase, that is of the institutional concepts. Before was dominant the totalitarianism concept, and then totalitarianism concept remain, we can say, so constantly in time, over time. About portrait, there is also constant. What change is portrait? I mean here also introduction to Hannah Arendt. So I put together, so to simplify here, journalist portrait on Hannah Arendt, and also introduction to Hannah Arendt's work and Hannah Arendt and work, where there is a mixing. And here is constant continuity, can trace the continuity over time, and there is a lot of introduction within political science. And in Italy, on the contrary, there is a continuity of concept over time. Also, there is not tendencies, it's always so linear over time. And what is interesting, and there is a more concentration of concept within political theory that is also related to, in my opinion, my interpretation, to the necessity of justify or legitimate the political philosophy within the academic sphere, Italian academic sphere. and also by the fact that there is more high concentration in less in few items related to the fact that the network, social network of in Italy is very closer as in Germany. In Germany there is very fragmented, and it is closer. All there are scholars from pupils from, and that means that the transmission between among generation is so similar.
I wanted to ask whether you have any Italian reaction to the very recent reconfiguration of the picture about Arendt. I mean, I have in mind actually another set of notebooks being published as the Heidegger notebooks, yes, in the last 2 years, which actually, and the connection of this to the book of Bettina Steiner about the Eichmann trial, which actually very much went against the Arendtian interpretation and actually has the implication, and Richard Bolin and other people who played out these implications, that actually Arendt was much, in a way, was much more buying the Heideggerian narrative, and that's why it was actually blind to a certain extent to the non-banal aspects of Nazism. So there's a huge debate actually in the last 1 years about this, and I wonder whether in the Italian context, exactly because of this left-right division, I mean, is there any kind of reception of this? I mean, are Italians reading this debate in any way, and how do they interpret it?
There was a presentation of the book at the end of the April in the University of Verona, where there is the concentration of, it was on the board, but where there is a concentration, concentration of feminist philosopher, political philosopher, Olivia Barada, Adriana Cavalero, this is the other, and also Ilaria Possenti. And it was introduced by Adriana Cavalera. What they said me about, also by talking about this book, that the problem is not so much in Italy, the right and left. This problem is the boundary of the disciplines, because it is just difficult to criticize some authorial person, for example, like Heidegger, and this in the sense that in this, if I understand your answer, it is difficult in Italy that there are some books, for example, this on Heidegger, and that criticize some authorial.
But the problem is that Arendt's integrity was questioned. Yes, so it's an issue for if you are a feminist leftist and you learn that actually Arendt's relationship to intellectual relationship to Heidegger was deeper than.
No, in general it's not.
So nobody realizes.
In general it's not a problem.
Heidegger was appropriated by the modern left American very recently, and also by the Italian left.
Not so much Heidegger, but Schmidt.
Schmidt also.
Heidegger and Roth.
Heidegger in the US
from post-Marxist, and
reference
Arendt also among this. But it was not a problem, Heidegger, not as an academic field in the case.
Very short question.
Was there any reception of Arendt in East Germany before the Wende?
I tried, and maybe Stefania can better answer later. And I wrote some philosopher that also was philosopher during the GDR, and they said me that on academic level it was unknown Hannah Arendt, and there was some dissident groups that read Hannah Arendt, especially the totalitarianist book, in East Germany as well as, for example, in Poland. What I know.
Okay, so we can observe the importance of political states in the international reception in the case of Arendt, and we will see later again, and also in the case of Gramsci, while your case was more academic states. So we come back to the case of Arendt. So thank you very much, Barbara. And now I think we will hear also about some political states with the case of Polanyi, which will be presented by Jean-Michel Chazich, who is a member of the French INTERCO team. And he will be speaking about the importation of Karl Polanyi's work in France since 1974. Mais oui, mais sinon je peux le mettre en bas. Vas-y, commence. Ah oui, oui, non, non, ça va.
Okay, well, first, thanks to the organizers for inviting me. So, in this study, I'd like to focus on the species for which Karl Polanyi was and is labeled, presented, and commented from the 70s, the mid-70s, to the years 2000. In order to highlight how the intellectual identity of Karl Polanyi is made up according to the specific features of the intellectual and academic fields in France at different times. So as it happened, the first importation of Polanyi's thoughts took place in the mid-70s, which were the years of intense intellectual, political and disciplinary crisis in the French academic field, which can be grossly summed up as the rapid decline of the Marxism and the structuralist anthropology in the university. So this is nothing of a coincidence, of course, since Polanyi's work was first invested by young scholars that were who were directly involved in the struggles through which the academic field was to be remodeled from the mid-70s on. So yet mainly academic, the reception of Karl Polanyi in France has gone beyond the world of universities in recent years, following the financial crisis of 2007, which set up the scene for renewed interest in Karl Polanyi in France. Karl Polanyi, who is now presented as an up-to-date critic of the globalized market economy and its fatal consequences. So since 2007, that was this, but I think, yes, it's available. So since 2007, there was publishing offspring of Polanyi's books. So since 2007, The Livelihood of Man was first translated by Flammarion, which is a general publishing house. The Great Transformation was reissued by Gallimard. And at the same time, Flammarion reissued a small essay by Jérôme Beaucourant, who is an heterodox economist, a small essay called Have You Read Polanyi? And Le Seuil, another general publishing house, published several essays of Karl Polanyi. So, and before that, the last publication of Polanyi's book goes back to 1988 with the reprint of The Great Transformation in a pocket edition by Gallimard. So there is a time gap of 20 years almost, from 1988 to 2007. So, as the interrogative form of Jérôme Beaucourant's essays suggests, Karl Polanyi can be seen as a thinker who is still to be discovered in France in the years 2000. So, here I would like to present the importation of Polanyi as the product of several, quoting Pierre Bourdieu here, selective and labeling operations. So the first objective is to see how Karl Polanyi's writing passed through the selective filters in the mid-70s, that is to say, to underline which factors might have played a role in its importation, and who were the actors of this importation. Second objective is to detect the labeling filters, that is to say, which factor might have played a role in the way Polanyi was identified in terms of discipline, in terms of scientific and ideological identity. So, very roughly summarized, Karl Polanyi's intellectual career in France can be highlighting by two main dynamics. First one, Karl Polanyi as a development or an antidote to Marxism, or Karl Polanyi as an anthropologist or an economist. Yeah. So, first thing, locating Karl Polanyi in academic journals. So, quotations of Karl Polanyi in the French scientific literature are still very rare until the mid-70s. With the exception of the Annales-ESC, which was the journal of the École des Annales, which was who published an issue in 1974, was the first attempt to use Polanyi as a central theoretical reference. Before that, Karl Polanyi was found very rarely in French literature and mostly in form of very short footnotes. This issue of the Annales-ESC in 1974 was then the first explicit attempt to use Polanyi as a central theoretical reference. I will come back to it just afterwards. In the 80s and the 90s, the reception slightly accelerates and it really takes off in the 2000s. It must be said, and I will come back to it later as well, that from the 80s on, the Revue du MOS review, MOS journal, took a central part in the diffusion of Karl Polanyi's thought in France. Yeah, and the other interesting feature in this for the academic journal is the way the quotations are spread out among disciplines. And I think in this graph the most interesting feature is the trajectory of economics journals, which is the purple little purple dots line. And we can see that there is a steady, very steady rise of economic journals quoting Polanyi from the 80s on. And for the more recent years, the economic journals are in third place in terms of quoting Polanyi, behind sociology and political science in French journal. So this is quite clear here that there is a shift in the discipline identity of Karl Polanyi from the 70s to the years 2000s. Okay, so here's for the general background of the reception of Karl Polanyi. So now back to the early importation and Karl Polanyi and the historical anthropology, which was the socio-intellectual context of the early importation. So as stated above, the first importation was in 1974 in the issue of Annales Économie, Société, Civilisation, dedicated to the concept of reciprocity in Polanyi's work. The issue notably features the first article written by Lucette Valency, that is an apology to use Polanyi's work in historical studies. This issue of Annales-ESC is the written legacy of a seminar initiated by historian William Randall at the EHESS in 72-73. This seminar was officially named Historical Anthropology, but was renamed by its members the Tricontinental, so the Tricontinental, as reference to the geographical areas that were studied by these young scholars, which was Asia, Africa, and South America, as well as to the Tricontinental Conference, of course, that was held in Cuba in 1965. So the participants of this seminar all belong to the same generation. They were young historians about to finish their PhD dissertation. They entered the academic field career in the years that followed 68, and in the institutions that then sheltered the scientific avant-garde in social sciences, such as the Centre Universitaire de Vincennes or the EHESS. So as newcomers in the fields, they were relatively dominated and also quite invisible, as well, at least that's what Lucette Valency told me. As she recalls it, the Tricontinental, this seminar, is described as an enchanted space of intellectual exchanges. So I quote, the seminar might not have been on the information board at the EHESS. We had no students or PhD candidates at the seminar due to our inferior rank, so it was only researchers, and we did exactly what we wanted. It was wonderful. And it's that in that context that they started to discuss Karl Polanyi's work. It is also interesting to note that besides the studied areas that are all in exotic, so to say, exotic areas, I will come back to the exotic adjective, but also, well, two of them are foreigners, which, well, and Lucette Valency was born and raised in Tunisia, but might have played a role in, well, I'll come back to it a little bit later. So, yes. What was in this issue of the Annales ESC? Well, as I said, they all worked on exotic societies, and well, they were willing to knock down the barrier between anthropology, which was dominant at the time, structural anthropology, and history. And as working on exotic societies, they wanted to make a historical economy of these societies. So the explicit goal of the Annales ESC issue is to knock down these intellectual barriers, as stated in the introduction of the issue, which is here. In the middle of these difficulties emerges the already old work of Karl Polanyi. It addresses the same issues, tries to build a bridge between ethnological and historical societies, and puts forward a self-concept that can be used both by historians and anthropologists. So the position in the field of these first importers explains the logics of the initial framing of Karl Polanyi's work in France. They were dominated as newcomers. They were also dominated in regard of their discipline, history versus anthropology, and dominated also because of their research topics, because historical studies of non-European societies. So the animators of the Tricontinental of this seminar find themselves in the position of avant-garde importers, and Polanyi is brought up in this issue as a means to a peace treaty between historian and anthropologist, whereas structural anthropology at that time functioned as a theoretical magnetic field, so to say. So most notably, this is the concept of reciprocity that is invested by these scholars, these young scholars, as it opens up new research path for the economic history of exotic societies. So in 1 year after this issue of the Annales ESC, the first book of Polanyi is translated in French. This is Trade and Markets in Early Empire, which was published in Larousse, which is an academic publishing house. And the preface was written by Maurice Godelier, who was at that time the assistant of Claude Lévi-Strauss at the Collège de France, so a much more influential central figure in the academic field. Maurice Godelier transferred to the text his own scientific legitimacy. But, well, furthermore, the initial framing of the importation is important for what it does to Polanyi's reception, but also for what it does not. And I think this is very important. So in this case, Polanyi is not used as the means to criticize contemporary capitalistic societies. And Lucette Valency herself puts it this way in the interview I had with her. The topic of the Annales issue was the concept of reciprocity. What we didn't talk about is what is important to you, the great transformation. That wasn't for us. So the next stages of the importation was undertaken by different actors who will widen the initial framing. So from a historical anthropologist of non-European society, Polanyi will swiftly be understood, yes, I will be very quick now, as the critic of market economy. Yes, so very quick, because, well, I won't have the time to talk about the Marx thing. Expansion of the initial framing, so which is undertaken by the Revue du Mos. So the Revue du Mos was created in 1981, and Revue du Mos means anti-utilitarian movement in social sciences, and Mos is of course also Durkheim's nephew. The creation of this journal relates to two combined phenomena. First, the rapid decline of structural anthropology and Marxism in the French academic field, And second phenomena, the utilitarian turn of economics in the 70s and in the beginning of the 80s, with the almost hegemonic domination of neoclassical paradigm in the discipline. So, along with the Annales journal, the Revue du Mos came to be prominent in the diffusion of Polanyi's thoughts among scholars. In the first issue, the creators of the journal clearly states their intellectual allegiance, of course, to Marcel Mauss, but also to Karl Polanyi and Bronislaw Malinowski. So this is the first article in the first issue of the Revue du Mos. These three figures are the intellectual tutelage of the journal. In the first year, well, still today, the Revue du Mos mainly targets economics as the discipline where the utilitarian axiomatic has reached its deepest implications. So, as a critic of the belief held by liberal economists of the universal and natural dimension of market economy, Karl Polanyi could not fit better in the most theoretical frame. And in the following years, so from the 80s on, all the scholars who took part in the translation or the diffusion of Polanyi's work in France all contributed to the Revue du Mos, and they were also almost all economists. Well, how much do you have? 2 minutes? Okay. So very, very fast then about the Marx reference. The other reason why these first young scholars gathered around the tricontinental seminar imported Polanyi is also there was this will to save Marxism, the Marxism reference at least in social science, and in this way Karl Polanyi worked quite well, at least in the eye of these first importers. So. Just very quickly, so this is Lucette Valency in the interview. I belong to those who were still trying to save Marxism. We were still looking for an inspiration in Marx, or the possibility to reconcile him with other thinkers. In that respect, Polanyi worked quite well. So, very quick, so a few years later, in the first publication of The Great Transformation, who happened in 1983, so this is 9 years after the first importation, the preface to The Great Transformation was written by Louis Dumont, who was a prominent anthropologist and writer in the Gallimard publishing house, but who was nothing but a Marxist and attacked several times Marxism here and there, and especially in the preface for The Great Transformation. So here's a quick quote from Louis Dumont. "We applaud Polanyi's effort to replace social classes into the global society. Was it a matter of common sense? Maybe, but common sense has suffered a lot since Marx and Engels." So there is a very strong, well, turnaround in the period of a few years. One must be said also, I didn't put it in the PowerPoint, that Lucette Valency, who wrote the first article in the Annales issue in 1874, ended with this very eloquent sentence. She quotes Polanyi and then said, "Who could say if this sentence is from Karl Marx or Karl Polanyi?" And 10 years later, this is very different. And in his essay, Jérôme Courant, who was published in 2005, in his introduction, he says that the failure of the USSR stands in the way of a complete return of Karl Marx in the critiques of capitalist societies. So, first introduced as a way to save Marxism, Polanyi quickly became the way to overcome, to get over Marxism. And I will stop here now.
So we have set 10 minutes for discussion. So again, we have a kind of political reception and appropriation and struggles around the appropriation of a big thinker. Yes, Alessia.
Yes. What I found very interesting in your presentation is this shifting role, this reference to Polanyi, and probably you could now elaborate a little bit more on it. And in the beginning, it is clearly anthropology and history analysis, and then for that theory of gift and reciprocity, which is important. But then, more recent period, as you showed it on graph, it's more heterodox economics and history. Right? And my guess would be that also the meaning of this reference also changed with time. And so probably it has to be, and you tell me your thoughts about it, maybe that now in more recent period, reference to Polanyi probably works as an argument for the use of historical comparative methodology in economic analysis.
Yes. I'm not sure if it's changed a lot. Maybe, well, of course, a little, because I think there were several books that were published at the beginning of the year 2000s that harshly criticized the actually empirical data that Polanyi used, and so now heterodox economics nowadays mostly use Polanyi as a theoretical background, but not for the empirical data that are not very relevant anymore, and everybody seems to agree on that. But what was very important, and I should have said that, is of course the shift to economics is to heterodox economics, because the takeover of neoclassical economics in the end of the 70s tends to isolate economics from other social sciences, which is not, by the way, a French singularity. But yes, so the investment in Karl Polanyi was also the way to renew the link with other social sciences, and especially history and anthropology. And yeah, but I'm not sure otherwise that the use of Polanyi changed that much, especially, for example, in the currency studies in heterodox economics, where thinkers like Polanyi, but also Borislav Malinowski are often used. I can't remember it, but I will find it very easily.
Other questions? Yes, Victor.
Not a question, just a nationalist note. I'm going to try about the fact that Polanyi...
International gathering you there.
Yes, because Polanyi did his career in Britain, Great Britain mostly. He belongs to this great generation of post-1919 emigrants, which on the one hand disappointed by the Red Communist regime, by the Hungarian Soviet Republic, and on the other hand they were the losers of the 1918 revolution, which was a liberal, radical liberal socialist kind of revolution, a modernist revolution, so to say, getting out of and doing away with the old regime Hungary. And all these people who could invest their hopes in the modernist Western type transformation of Hungary were obliged more or less to emigrate, and they belong to a strong Jewish intellectual layer of Budapest, very strongly concentrated in Budapest. Part of them made a significant career in the West, and I must say that most, actually exclusively, the famous Hungarians belong, almost all the famous Hungarians belong to this generation, having very different careers abroad. You have mentioned already today George Lukács. Mannheim was also mentioned, who went through the Frankfurt School before getting up to ending up in London School of Economics, like Polanyi, if I understand it well. So just a reminder of the importance of this post-1919 Hungarian, heavily Jewish Hungarian emigration.
Other, yeah? Can you speak up?
And the early reception of her work there before?
I haven't worked yet on the reception of Polanyi abroad, but what is quite clear, I don't have any data to back up what I'm saying here, but what is quite clear is that in the United States, at least, Karl Polanyi came very quickly to recognition, at least in the academic world. Because, well, the Great Transformation was written in mostly in Great Britain, but it was published first in New York. Because he moved to the US in 1941, I think, and the book was published in 1944.
Near the end of his life, Polanyi was part of a small group doing coexistence as a journal between West and East. Haven't been anyone in France collaborating to this? No?
Well,
I don't remember it, but did you come across
as
this?
far as I looked in a biography information about Polanyi, I didn't find any connection to France whatsoever, or to France thinkers. But well, yes, I just know that he came back to Hungary very late in his life, the beginning of the 60s. And
not really, personally.
No, he visited, came back.
yeah, he visited, but yeah.
His wife played a bigger role in Hungary. In the 60s.
Well, it's quite a tribe.
That's now
Polanyi tribe. It's quite a big family. They had the main intellectual saloon during the First World War and before. The mother, Polanyi mother, being the mistress of the tribe.
It was
The whole
Galileo's.
family emigrated. One of them actually had a Nobel Prize.
Jean Polanyi.
Yeah.
And Galileo Sokol was also
The
Polanyi.
nephew of Karl.
So it's quite a large family.
No other question? So now we have a break. After you can take our whole break now because
Well, actually,